let you know when the video is running, but just so you know, sound can be picked up sometimes sooner than video. Okay, camera's live.
Great. Good morning and welcome to Cowichan Valley Regional District Regional Services Committee for June 24th, 2020. I'd like to also acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people and welcome everyone, including a few alternates from North Cowichan this morning. And we will start off with an approval of the agenda. So moved, seconded, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Seeing none. Moving on now to the adoption of the minutes of May 27th, 2020. Moved, seconded. Any questions? Welcome, Mr. Stone, Director Stone. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Seeing none. Moving on now to the, is there any business arising from the minutes, Ms. Legault? None?
Nothing from staff.
Great, thank you. Moving on now to public input period. Ms. Legault, do we have anything from the public? Which I'd like to remind the public that it is, if you have anything, that it is legislative services at cvrd.bc.ca. If you would like to email, if you have anything to add.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first item is from Bernard Yerlink. Dear Chair, the recent survey of South Cowichan aquifers 197, 198, and 203, written by Sylvia Barroso and Kali Malnichenko, points out two naturally occurring contaminants in the water of many of the wells drawing from these aquifers, manganese and arsenic. While only 2% of the wells tested had arsenic exceeding Health Canada's maximum allowable concentration of 10 micrograms per litre, it should be noted that MAC levels are based upon the health outcomes of adults. A number of studies, an example, a 2014 study by Dr. Joseph Graziano of Columbia University, have shown that children consuming water containing 5 to 10 micrograms per litre and higher of arsenic had lower mental abilities than those consuming water with arsenic lower than 5 micrograms per litre. It is noted that in the study of the South Cowichan aquifers, 7% of the wells had arsenic levels between 5 and 10 micrograms per litre. Manganese is also a neurotoxin, particularly for the striatal region of the brain, increasing the probability of developing Parkinson's disease. 38% of wells tested had manganese levels above MAC. I think that there should be a public education campaign urging the public to have their wells tested for arsenic, manganese, as well as lead. Furthermore, there should be further testing throughout the CVRD for the distribution of arsenic and manganese in drinking water. We know that there are areas of Mill Bay with elevated manganese in drinking water wells. Although lead was not found to exceed the MAC in the present survey of aquifers 197, 198, and 203, we do know of one well located on Goldstream Heights with lead levels 5 times the MAC. This well happens to be located next to a landfill site deemed to be contaminated by the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. Whether there is a relationship between the well contamination and the contaminated landfill site is not known. What is clear is that the wells in the Goldstream Heights area should be tested for lead as well as other contaminants. And that is signed Bernard Yerlink of Mill Bay. The second item of public input is from Cliff Evans. Madam Chair, on this morning's agenda are one report from Environmental Services Division on groundwater quality of aquifers 197 and 198 in the South Cowichan area. I perused the groundwater quality survey. I think it was an excellent report and was pleased to see some remediation and recommendations took place where needed. We need more preventative maintenance and advisory information to help our residents repair defective water supply systems. Many of these people have moved here from the city and have no idea how to run or maintain a country water and sewer system. Good show for helping them. I was disappointed that Shawnigan, and especially the Stebbings Road and Goldstream Heights area, wasn't included in the survey. I noticed that in the water tests done, there were no exceedances of lead. Had they tested one property on Goldstream Heights, they would have had an exceedance in lead. The CVRD, VIHA, Highland Health, and the Ministry of Environment know about this, and VIHA has done a water test to confirm the exceedance of lead in the water. The source of the lead should be investigated as soon as possible. There is a registered contaminated soil deposit site beside this home, and its well should be tested to see if it is a source of the lead. Why does everything have to take so long to get this situation rectified when residents' health is at risk? The problem was reported to the CVRD in August 2019. The CVRD asked the Shawnigan Basin Society to help. We reported this to VIHA, and they did another water test in September 2019 and confirmed lead exceedances in the well. To date, the owners are waiting for still another water test from VIHA, and no test has been done on the well from the contaminated fill site next door. Surely government can work faster than this when the health of our citizens are at risk. Having to haul potable water every week because of a contaminated well must be a hardship that shouldn't have to be endured by any taxpayer in the CVRD. I would like to see a CVRD and VIHA rapid response team to analyze and rectify serious contaminated water problems that could affect our residents. I'm sure the Shawnigan Basin Society can help if we have some funding support from the CVRD. Thank you. Signed, Cliff Evans. We have 10 minutes left in the period, and so I'm just going to double check that I haven't received any further submissions. And at this point, I haven't received anything further.
Ms. Legault, did you, we had a communication earlier on between us regarding a communication from Miss Allen in Cobble Hill about the R2, I think it is, or is it R1? Is that not come into you again? Or is that for a different meeting?
I was, through the chair, I was unable to confirm that it was intended for public input period.
Laura, you're on mute.
I'd like to welcome Sylvia Barrasso, please.
Hello.
Welcome.
Should I begin the presentation now, or?
Yes, please.
Okay, I will do.
So Sylvia is the regional hydrologist at Ministry of Forest, Lands and Natural Resources Operation and Rural Development. And this is about South Cowichan groundwater analysis for Aquifer 197 and 198. Welcome. Yes, you've got it on there. Thank you.
Okay, great. Please let me know if there's any technical difficulties you're not seeing.
Sure.
So I'm very pleased to have been invited by Kate Miller today to speak to you about the South Cowichan Groundwater Quality Survey results and recommendations. I will point out that the preliminary results of the study had previously been presented to the community at the Shawnigan Lake Community Association or Center and to the CVRD Electoral Areas Services Committee in June 2014. So the outline of the presentation is just to provide you for your information, a little bit more information about the water protection program of Ministry of Forest, Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development, to talk about the objectives and the location of the study, the results, and some recommendations that come up from this work. So I will note, or the main function of the water protection section for which I work is implementation of the Water Sustainability Act. That includes the groundwater protection regulation and dam safety regulation, and providing technical and scientific expertise for implementation of the water sustainability regulations. So things like surface and groundwater licensing are included in that. We maintain a network of observation wells where groundwater level and temperature are measured on a continuous basis. We have over 82 wells across Vancouver Island and Gulf Islands region. We also work with Ministry of Environment for the development of tools and policies around water protection and including groundwater science. And one of the key aspects of our work is the partnerships that we have with municipal and regional governments to build groundwater knowledge and to promote the effective management of water supplies. So in 2013, we set out to undertake a joint study with Cowichan Valley Regional District of one of the most important aquifers of your region, where groundwater is the primary water source for numerous thousands of users. The primary focus was the Cherry Point Aquifer, which is shown here, this yellow shading. The dots represent wells that are located within the study area. The lighter yellow dots representing wells that are constructed in the Cherry Point Aquifer, which is a thicker deposit of unconsolidated sand and gravel sediments. And then the darker brown dots represent wells that are constructed within bedrock. We have a crystalline bedrock aquifer in the just north of Mill Bay area, and then in the northern part of the study area, closer to Duncan, the bedrock is sedimentary sandstone and shale. So that was the general focus of the study. This map shows the density of wells within the area, shown in shades of green. So where it's darker green, there's a higher density of wells. A lighter green indicates a lower density of wells. So the sample sites, which are these blue dots, were distributed throughout the study area and included a total of 82 wells, 70 of which were private domestic wells, and 12 of which were water supply systems. The water supply system service areas are shown with these pink areas. So within those areas, the primary water source would be the water supply system, and private domestic or irrigation wells would be a secondary source. So the objectives of the study were to undertake sampling of raw groundwater quality, so water that was representative of water in the aquifer itself, pre-treatment, prior to any kind of treatment being implemented. We wanted to identify whether there were any naturally occurring contaminants or elements present, or if there were elements that were indicative of the human impacts on groundwater quality in the study area. A key aspect was the provision of information to well owners, both about their water quality in their well and also about aspects related to well maintenance. So a well inspection was completed, and if there are any deficiencies, then people were notified of that and given information how they could make changes to their well. And of course, a key aspect as well was this partnership with CVRD and FNRO. The teams that went out for the sampling consisted of staff from both the ministry and CVRD, and CVRD provided a lot of logistical support for contacting folks in the initial trying to find volunteers for participation. The overall results, I think, is a good news story. The groundwater quality in this area is excellent, and most sites met drinking water quality guidelines. But we did find that there's both natural elements and anthropogenic pollutants present. And the well owners were provided with information about the occurrence of those elements within their wells. And in general, we found that there was a link between some of the types of land use in this area, the proximity of the wells to certain land use, and groundwater quality that was observed. So this is just an overview of some of the key aspects or results. As you've already heard mentioned in some of these letters, submissions to your committee, one of the findings was that arsenic was present and was widespread. Arsenic is an element that is naturally present due to dissolution of minerals into the water. The health concerns related to arsenic have to do with the link between ingestion of arsenic, particularly on a chronic or long-term basis, and the link to some cancers, internal cancers. So Health Canada does recommend treatment of arsenic to a concentration as low as reasonably achievable. So even though the guideline for arsenic is 10 micrograms per liter, at lower concentrations, there could be long-term or chronic health concerns that could be of concern. So approximately 25% of the samples had an arsenic greater than 2 micrograms per liter. And that was a surprise to us and something that residents should be made aware of. Only 2 exceedances of the 10 microgram per liter guideline were observed. Manganese is an element that has both aesthetic concerns, so it affects the pleasantness of water for drinking, and it also has, at higher concentrations, can affect children, neurological development in children, and potentially some health effects, for example, effects on fertility in males. And it exceeded both aesthetic or health guidelines in up to 50% of the samples. So again, it was widespread. Nitrate is naturally low in concentration in groundwater, and it was found to be undetected in 33% of the samples within the study area. Using the samples from this study and a compilation of results of all water chemistry that we could find for aquifer 197, we determined that the background concentration in the aquifer is 0.5 milligrams per liter nitrate. Where nitrate exceeds that level, that could be an indicator that there's impacts from land use. In approximately 13 of the samples, there was concentrations above 2 milligrams per liter. And we analyzed those for stable isotopes of nitrate and found that the source was attributed to human or animal waste. Bacteria was present in a small number of the samples, and it was typically associated with shallower groundwater systems, for example, dug wells, and in some cases was linked to the construction and maintenance concerns for the wells. Here's a little snippet of some of the results from the water supply systems that were sampled in the area. And these include Cowichan Valley Regional District wells, as well as private improvement districts with and water systems. So focusing in on the nitrate, significant portion had nitrate undetected, and then there was elevated nitrate within some water supply systems. Some of this was not a concern, not a surprise to us. For example, some of these water systems are in the Fisher Road area where there's already a known occurrence of nitrate due to organic waste composting in that area. And but there were some other water systems where the elevated nitrate may be attributed to other types of land use, such as agriculture. You can also see that arsenic ranged from very low to some higher concentrations, and it is noted that some of these water supply systems do have a treatment system in place. Focusing in on the nitrate concern for a moment, just to talk a little bit about what sources on the land could be. So nitrate can be deposited on the land as a result of precipitation, capturing aerosols from industrial and vehicle emissions, and that infiltrates into the groundwater. Human and animal waste is a major source of nitrate in groundwater, so that includes manure application to land, the presence of cesspits or large-scale waste storage, for example, on farms, sewage lagoons and disposal fields for municipal and strata systems, and of course, household septic systems. Landfills and organic waste composting can be a source, and as is application of inorganic fertilizers to farmlands, and it can be naturally present in organic soils, for example, in wetlands. So within the study area, we did find that there was higher concentrations of nitrate were observed in sites or samples from sites that were proximal or closer to point sources. This map shows kind of a combination of things. So the stars represent places where there could be a large point source, for example, a manure septic or a manure cesspit, or a municipal water supply or wastewater treatment, or in this case in Cobble Hill, the organic waste composting facilities. The non-point source potential sources of non-point source pollution include agricultural sites. So you could have farms, including where there's beef or dairy operations, chicken, poultry operations, and horse paddocks. And the yellow areas represent where there's a municipal sewage provided like a municipal sewage treatment, and so the septic systems wouldn't be as prevalent in those areas. So what the green dots represent the nitrate, lower concentrations of nitrate, and the red represent where we've observed it as greater than 2 milligrams per liter. So, and then here the graph shows that there was a higher concentration and a greater variation or a greater range in concentrations noted where there was a proximity to a point source. So that's an interesting observation. And the other thing that was noted, so Cobble Hill Aquifer is partially confined, so there is a presence of till or low permeability sediments overlying the aquifer in some areas. But what we found was that the aquifer vulnerability was not a good predictor of whether or not we observed elevated nitrate. And so that the take-home message is that it's the land use is a major indicator of pollution rather than and that we can't necessarily rely on the confining layer above the aquifer to protect it from different activities on the land. Wrapping up here, the well owners benefited from provision of information about groundwater quality in their wells and identification of concerns related to well maintenance. The land use was linked to occurrence of nitrate above background within the aquifers. And adequate setback of wells from pollution sources, including septic systems and manure storage, is needed and will help to protect the aquifer source. I think that the CVRD and the ministry and other agencies could continue to work in the area in areas of source protection. There's environmental farm planning that can be undertaken, considerations with the liquid waste management planning process, and of course compliance and enforcement where there's unauthorized discharges. And the wellhead protection plans could be a good recommendation for the CVRD, irrigation or water supply system wells. I know that within the Fisher Road area, the water supply system wells have wellhead protection plans, and those also could be revisited with new information since they were completed close to 2 decades ago. So just wrapping up here, I will recommend that people check out the BC Water Science series of technical reports that are prepared by ministry and partners and published online at the Ministry of Environment website. There's a number of different studies on this website, including this one and others that cover issues of groundwater knowledge for your area. And acknowledge that the funding was provided by Cowichan Valley Regional District and the province of BC. And thanks especially to Kate Miller for her ongoing work with us in this area. That's it. Oop. I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, Lori, I don't hear you.
You're muted, Laurie.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, you go.
I look to my fellow directors now for any questions to Ms. Barrasso, and I see that I have Director Wilson. Go ahead, Director Wilson. I think you're the only hand up. Did I have any others? Okay, I have a few. I will mark them down.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to ask you for forbearance on this subject because it's far too important to quickly discuss and then move on. And I'd like to thank Mr. Barrasso. This really is an excellent document, and it's been a long time in coming, and it's very, very thorough. This is great. It takes a very complex and highly technical subject, and it puts it into lay terms that can be easily understood by people like myself. And this is something that we in Cobble Hill have been pressing for well over 10 years. And it's unfortunate that it's taken this long to get here. The report also provides an excellent précis on the issue of nitrates, including the transformation from nitrogen to the nitrates and nitrites. This can serve as an excellent reference to demonstrate the significance of the issue when future discussions are held. Such discussions and examinations, I sincerely hope and trust, will be held. And Ms. Barrasso has addressed the fact that continued work is required. Now, whether I'm supposed to be asking questions at this time, I'm not sure, but I would like to just make a few points that cement and stress what this report is saying as well. These are only the first steps in addressing the management of our precious groundwater resources, and there is a lot more to be done. And I'm very lucky in as much as in my area, I have access to well-qualified and willing volunteers, professional engineers, research scientists, etc. And they serve as a really good background. I'm sure that most of you will have heard of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who wrote the poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, the first line of which says, "Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink." Maybe that's an over-dramatization in this case, but maybe not. We all know water is essential for all socio-economic development and for maintaining healthy ecosystems. As the population increases and development calls for increased allocations of groundwater and surface water for the domestic, agriculture and industrial sectors, the pressure on water resources intensifies, leading to tensions, conflicts amongst users and excessive pressure on the environment. European Union has 2,057 cubic kilometers of fresh water, with over 1 million kilometers of rivers and streams and more than 1 million lakes. But the current water situation in Europe, according to the EEC, is described as 20% of all surface water in the EU is seriously threatened with pollution. I have a list of all sorts of other things that are going on, but basically the danger is there. And this is Canada has the 4th largest freshwater reserves in the world, almost 3,000 cubic kilometers. Let me say that, not cubic meters, cubic kilometers. And we're just 4th after Brazil, Russia, and the USA. And I hope we will never, ever get into the situation that Europe or even Brazil with the Amazon got themselves into. I do have some other points to bring up, but I'll defer to other people in there. But thank you again to Ms. Barroso and her team for bringing this up. One question for her, if she could, she refers to the Cherry Point aquifer, and I'm assuming then that this is aquifer 197. If she could just clarify, that would be great. Thank you very much for your time.
Ms. Barroso?
Yeah, the primary focus of the study, or the most of the wells sampled, were constructed within the Aquifer 197.
Thank you. Moving on now, I have Director Morrison has a question. Director Morrison?
Actually, this is a two-part, Madam Chair, if I could. Thank you for this report. I think I've seen components of this before. Just a couple of clarifications in regards to the Cobble Hill aquifer and the nitrates. I seem to recall a previous report where there was reference to uncertainty as to the source of the nitrates, and that there could be a fertilizer related source that they weren't able to follow up on, partially because the business that was using them isn't operating any further. Do you have any comment on that? And the second question is, you say that this aquifer is a partially confined aquifer, so there may be spots of a confining layer in some areas and not. But you also referred to how important land use is in relation to protecting that aquifer. So do you have a comment as to the preference as to individual septic versus local government operated sewage treatment facilities in regards to protecting the aquifers? Thank you.
Ms. Barroso?
Okay.
We can't hear you.
You still there? Oh.
Yes.
Yeah, and so the source of nitrates that we did for samples that exceeded, for sites where the sample exceeded 2 milligrams per liter nitrate, we sent those for analysis of nitrate isotopes. And those nitrate isotopes were indicated that the source was either human or animal waste. And to differentiate beyond human or animal was not possible with the results that we had, because the nitrate signature for those two sources is fairly similar. In terms of the presence of the septic versus, or the influence of septic versus municipal sewage treatment. When you look at the distribution of nitrate across the area, or the areas where nitrate was relatively low or background. So one of the last images on my presentation shows the map where there's municipal sewage collection, and then anywhere where outside of those sort of yellow shaded areas would have a septic system. And what we found was that across the area where there wasn't a municipal septic system, or they were the primary sewage treatment was from domestic septics, you didn't necessarily see a higher concentrations of nitrate in those areas. So the nitrate in those areas was lower or in the background, apart from, of course, the presence of other potential sources such as agricultural land use. So my sense was that septic was not contributing a significant amount to nitrate loading, but it's hard to explain, but when we did the compilation and we used the technique to try to understand what the background levels, you could see that there was a even lower background that was probably that's 0.01 milligrams per liter nitrate. That probably represents the area pre-septic and pre-development of the land. So if the area was still retained as kind of forested and no land clearing, we probably would see lower concentration. So it looked to me from the data that these municipal septic systems could be a potential source of nitrate loading to the aquifers. And so that does beg the question, how to treat the sewage, or whether or not there could be measures to reduce loading associated with those systems, either by or monitor, so ensuring that there is adequate monitoring surrounding where the disposal occurs, and tracking whether or not you see increases in nitrate in the aquifer as a result of loading from the municipal systems. And then there was another question about the confinement. So the till overlies the aquifer in some areas. Some of those materials may have been removed, and also the till has varying degrees of permeability or allowing the surface waters or recharge to occur into the aquifer. So I would say that I wouldn't hang my hat on the confinement of the aquifer to protect it from pollutant impacts. And I think that's important when you look at some of the policies and even legislation that has come out. For example, the Agricultural Waste Code of Practice talks about vulnerable areas, considering whether or not the aquifer is unconfined, etc. But I would say that it's the activity on the land surface, the presence, in particular, of these larger scale manure storage, cesspits. That sort of thing seems to be a greater indicator of potential pollution impacts in this aquifer area, or based on the study results.
Thank you so much. I have a bit of a speakers list. I'm going to go down and see if I haven't missed anyone. I have Director Nicholson, Director Justice, Director Heyman, Director Acton. Is there anyone else I'm missing? Back to Director Wilson. So go ahead, Director Nicholson. Questions for Ms. Barrasso?
Thank you. This is really interesting. I have two questions, one related to the land use one. A number of the recommendations, I think, are about looking at the Environmental Management Act or checking the AEM code and fixing regulations. So I am wondering what the process is to make sure that that is going to happen or will happen. That's my first question.
Yeah, I think that's possibly a policy issue, or the Agricultural Environmental Management Code of Practice is a new legislation, and it's definitely on my wish list to communicate with Ministry of Environment with respect to this code of practice and how we might, the fact that it's a code of practice, it's meant to roll out different provisions over time. So I think the results of this study have significance in terms of what additional measures they might put into that legislation. I have reached out in terms of compliance of the farms and looking at, so under this code of practice, existing farms with manure storage don't necessarily need to upgrade their municipal storage or manure storage, as far as I understand. But if they were instituting new manure storage facilities, they would have to undertake the higher standard of construction. So it could be that Cowichan Valley Regional District and Flunner could work with Ministry of Environment on, say, a compliance review of some of these sites where the large-scale manure storage is occurring, and whether or not there could be upgrades made. But I think that it also needs to be acknowledged that the farmers are, one way, more effective way that some of this stuff could be implemented would be if there could be upgrades could be incentivized. So, for example, provision of funding to a farmer to improve their manure storage, for example, or to participate in the environmental farm planning process. I know that there are some incentives within the Ministry of Agriculture for improving irrigation, for example. Similar things could be undertaken from the manure management side, to promote better practices, but also to help offset some of the significant costs that could be incurred to try to improve manure storage.
Follow up?
Thank you. Just on that point, before my second question, the problem with the environmental farm plan is they don't provide enough of a financial incentive, because manure storage issues and even irrigation issues are hugely expensive, and there isn't enough of an incentive to invest there. My second question is about the regulations. I am a bit concerned. We just had a report at our Electoral Area Services Committee about a new sewage treatment, amalgamating systems into one sewage treatment in the Mill Bay area. And we're always working to the standards, the drinking water standards. So when you talk about the possibility of nitrate, increasing nitrate in these disposal fields, I am wondering whether you think, or if we would be well advised to set ourselves higher standards than always going with the minimum required, because clearly with, you mentioned with arsenic and manganese, I think both of those you would want to go for a lower amount. So it's kind of like, should we actually set our own more ambitious targets when we're thinking about investing in sewage treatment?
Yeah, I think definitely I would agree, and I've stated that in the report, that looking for a lower threshold or indicator would be useful to try to identify impacts before they reach that point of exceeding the drinking water limit. And that would be something that I would promote the Ministry of Environment to consider. In terms of protections for, under the Water Sustainability Act, there is one tool called water objectives that could be implemented in some areas where nitrate was seen to be a concern, for example, where you could set a groundwater quality target for an aquifer, for example, a water objective similar to a surface water quality objective that could be, set as a threshold or a limit. So this has been proposed as a potential solution in the Halkar area where there is a known contamination occurring from non-point source pollution from agricultural waste. In that case, the concentrations are much higher in some of the impacted sources. I think it's a question of resourcing, and then also we don't have a mechanism for tracking groundwater quality. And I would say that probably we're not doing enough to work in the groundwater quality area. It's a bit of a jurisdictional difference and a resourcing issue with Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Fleur that is an ongoing concern. And I think that it is possibly, in municipal governments or regional governments such as Cowichan Valley Regional District could promote that with the ministry, say that it is a concern to them around land use and what tools or measures can be taken to try to address aquifer protection. I don't have all the answers. I think but I agree with you that it's something that we should do more on.
Thank you. I move now to Director Justice.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, through you to Ms. Barrasso. I just have a couple of questions related to what can be inferred about the containment of the aquifer. The report says that the groundwater is generally excellent, but the geochemistry is indicative of fresh groundwater, and that has been recently recharged. And I assume that the age of the water throughout the aquifer is not uniform and maybe correlated to certain rock types or something. But my first question is, are the anthropogenic contaminants highly correlated with those geochemical indicators of recent recharge? And the second question is the background nitrate level considered to be non-anthropogenic? I think you've probably looked at it isotopically, or is all the nitrate anthropogenic? Thanks.
Yeah, so well, unfortunately, because of the analysis, the isotope data were only available for samples that exceeded 2 milligrams per liter or more nitrate. So it focused in on sites, or it provided us information on sites that were likely impacted by human or animal waste based on the signature. So we didn't see inorganic. Oh, that was another question I didn't answer directly, but the inorganic fertilizers were not, the signature of the isotopes was not indicative of inorganic fertilizer. I don't think they're in widespread use in this area for agriculture. Some of the background could be due to land clearing and organics. So when there is studies that have shown that just the act of clearing the land from, say, and transition from a forested type of area to a more cleared system allows for more infiltration of organic materials and that into the groundwater. We didn't actually age date any of the samples, and that's something that we've been speaking with Kate about, whether or not we could undertake some select samples in future to try to address those types of questions.
Just as a follow-up, so the general picture that we get is of this is a question, I'm making it a statement, is of an area which is permeable from the surface in some places and not in others, and that underneath those permeable areas there's recent or immature water, and underneath the areas that aren't permeable there's more mature water. Is that more or less right or completely wrong?
Yeah, I would say that all of the land is permeable. It's just the rate of infiltration might be slightly slower in where there's confinement, but I would not say that it's what we find. Some of the deeper groundwater could be more mature as part of more of a regional flow system, such as some of the bedrock wells or deeper wells closer to the coast. So if you imagine the groundwater flowing from high elevation to lower elevation, further distance along that flow path would be some of the older, more mature groundwater. So we did see the indication of lower oxygen content, lower what we call oxidation reduction potential samples indicating more mature groundwater in toward the end of that groundwater flow path, so closer down toward the coast.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving on now. I'm just going to repeat my list because it was extended since I last let you know. Alternate Director Haim, Acton, Wilson, and Smith. Acton is off now. Okay, go ahead, Alternate Director Haim.
Question more related to the future of this.
Can't hear you very well.
Oh, okay. How are we right now?
They're better.
Okay. Just a question with regards to the report itself and kind of the future. The report, my understanding, it's a snapshot in time. I went back to the link, for example, and there's a report on South Wellington, Cassidy, and North Oyster Aquifer area. Study was done, or tests were done in 2011, 2012. Report came out in 2015. It's now 2020. Is there any efforts on the part of the ministry or resources on the part of the ministry to either update the data, revisit original study conclusions, and also relate that data to any changing standards as we go forward? Or are these point in time, here's a snapshot, and then on to the next study?
Well, I would be honest and say there's not a lot of resources right now being set aside by the ministry toward this type of work, unfortunately. And in terms of returning to assess the conditions, there are no current plans to do so. There are opportunities, I would say, for CVRD to promote or continue some of this work. An example would be, for example, through a regional water quality incentive program where groundwater users could obtain a subsidy for water quality testing or sampling, and then provide that data to CVRD or to the ministry as a part of that process. So that has been done in some other areas where it has the benefit of providing information to the homeowner and also to the region. And then once a evaluation or once a larger data set are available, then you could go back and reevaluate. There's also the management of the water system. So the water systems, of course, undertake their own water sampling on a regular, frequent basis. And so they can track that water quality change over time. And in addition to providing that data through the environmental management monitoring system, the provincial database. So if we could link those up, I think that would be an opportunity there. So if the data were uploaded, when the sample was collected and the data were automatically uploaded to the provincial system, then we could look at that over time. So I think there's those opportunities, and we might look for regional leadership on some of them.
Director Wilson.
Caught me by surprise there.
Would you like me to go to Director Smith and come back to you?
No, that's okay. I've got my piece of paper here. Thank you very much. It's an interesting contribution there, or rather interesting observation there, Mr. Barroso, about municipal systems could be contributing. Would you like to just expand on that, although you have a little bit, but just a little bit more? For instance, here in Cobble Hill, we have a very modern system, and the liquid waste which comes into the dispersal areas is very, very clear and of the highest standard. So I'm just wondering if you could just expand a little bit on what you just said there.
Well, I probably won't expand much more because I didn't look in detail at sampling in and around, say, the lagoons. I know that there are monitoring results from groundwater monitoring around some of the major disposal areas, and that is something that is managed through the Ministry of Environment through their compliance with permit conditions. So maybe just leave it at that, because I don't know that I can speak specifically to certain sites.
Understood. And if I could have a follow-up, please. Yeah, these and I'm glad you've mentioned that preventative measures to protect against contamination are required rather than waiting until after the contamination occurs. And this concept, I'm sure you'll be keeping in the forefront of the process, and to avoid a repetition of what we're seeing in the Fisher Road area, which has been mentioned many times in your report. And I'm wondering if there are any clear action plans for addressing each of the recommendations which are mentioned in your report, so that they don't get inadvertently ignored as time goes on, and where those reports would possibly be posted. And as a closing comment, I am really very reassured by this report that that things are now happening here. And just to say that the water districts of Braithwaite, Cobble Hill and Arbutus Ridge are being well serviced, and with a few minor exceptions like the Fisher Road area, we have very, very good water in the South Cowichan area. And we need to work hard to keep it that way. And I'm glad to see that you are. And I'm sure you'll be hearing more from me on this. Thank you very much for your help on this.
Director Wilson, there's also a staff report we can talk more, and we'll move now to Director Smith.
Thank you very much. Through the chair to Ms. Barrasso. I've definitely found the report interesting. I had read the earlier report that was out, and it's good to see that there's monitoring that's continuing, and these areas are having a better understanding of the direction that they're going. One of the things I noticed in your presentation was that the presentation is different from the one that was on our agenda, and it missed the one on the agenda. It doesn't have the same maps. Is that possible for us to have those maps for us to have a look at? And one of the things that I really notice in our area, and I'm sure it's with all the agricultural areas, is that the farmers choose to take their animal waste and spread it over their farm fields. Do you notice that when that is the method that they use to dispose of their animal waste, that it depends on the soil and how permeable it is as to the nitrates and some of the other things? I'm sure that there's antibiotics and other chemicals going into the soil based on that. So is there part of the study that being part of the study also?
Yeah, so in terms of application of manure or fertigation with manure water is, I believe, practiced in this area. We didn't have a lot. The information that we had around the presence of non-point source pollution was spotty. I mean, we would try to work with the information provided through the agricultural Ministry of Agriculture agricultural land use survey that was completed in 2012, I believe. The literature shows that there can be impacts from manure spreading, and that some of those impacts can be mitigated depending on the time of year in which the manure is applied, or how it is applied, whether it's applied as a solid or as a liquid. I don't have, as I say, I don't have a lot of information about the actual practices in this area, although I've seen fertigation with manure water in CVRD. I think that it's something that is the next steps to try to address those types of non-point source pollution is really to work with the farming community on best practices, and has already been mentioned about that there is the environmental farm plan, and then there's this agricultural environmental management code of practice, and looking at those types of things and a rollout with that. And I would look for, in some ways, leadership from Ministry of Ag and Ministry of Environment on those types of initiatives. But we definitely see that across BC that there are impacts from that type of non-point source pollution from agricultural activities contributing to elevated nitrates in aquifers. And I think it's a larger problem that it's not just here in CVRD, but overall, and recognizing that we do want to have farming on our land, and so it is important to have food security and promote those activities. So how do we balance those and try to use those best practices to try to mitigate impacts?
Thank you very much, Ms. Barrasso. I'd like to, we'll do our virtual applause, and thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and for the excellent questions that people have brought up.
Awesome. That's very important. It's very important in the regional district. I think like everywhere else, water is really critical. Thank you so much. We're moving on now.
Okay, I will leave you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And now we turn to Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No correspondence information items. So on to staff reports. Item R1 is a report from the Environmental Services Division on the groundwater quality survey in South Cowichan area.
Thank you. And this would be Ms. Miller.
Thank you. And I certainly want to thank Ms. Barrasso for joining us this morning as well. It's been wonderful to have her to kind of go through the process with you. The report before you under SR1 is a mechanism to table that report and the recommendations, and to talk a little bit about how those recommendations would be included in both the South Cowichan Liquid Waste Management Plan process, where there's an opportunity to integrate some of the agricultural or non-point source issues into policy and education mechanisms, as well as within the new Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program, the development of a regional groundwater quality monitoring program, and from that, a regional strategy ultimately that will inform future land use practices, decision-making, and potentially infrastructure going forward. So you've got that report before you. If you've got any specific questions, I know that Director Smith had asked about the maps. The attachment A of that report has the full report with all the maps for you. I'd be happy to send it to you if you want it in another format.
Thank you so much. I'm turning to committee and I see Director Acton. Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that the long-term planning and the future policy making is important, but I'm just wondering how this is a lot of information that it's a shame not to use it in the near future. How could we start using some of this information when we make decisions for development permits and development in our area, so that we're not losing all of this information and we're not waiting until things are dire and the information's out of date? My understanding is a lot of this information was gathered 6 years ago. So we're working on a clock here. And so again, my question is to staff, how do we start using this information in the planning department and making better decisions on development permits?
May I?
Go ahead, Ms. Miller.
Yes. Through you, Madam Chair, we are currently using this information to inform the updated South Sector Liquid Waste Management planning process that will help identify, particularly with regards to the issue of potential septic fields, whether they are receiving environments that are at risk. I do want to also make the point that the South Cowichan area has a requirement for disposal to meet the Class A standards. And so the question then becomes, do we have additional parameters, as Ms. Barroso pointed out, under the water quality objectives? And so I believe in July we'll be tabling the regional water quality monitoring strategy, as well as the updated objectives reports for the areas in which they've been completed. So those pieces of information are quite important. It gives us something to fall back to when we look at land use practices and requirements or requests of developers or property owners to protect the resource. We want to make sure that it's bounded in good science and that we've got the key information behind it. So going forward, we're also working closely with land use services in the modernized OCP development and what that might look like in terms of any adjustments or changes to processes or requirements for land use within the region once that modernized OCP is tabled before the public. So at this point, the data itself informs communications and education under the new drinking water program. When that program is able to get up and on its feet in terms of public education. In the meantime, we're using this study and the partner study that was done in the northern area to inform the development of a regional groundwater monitoring strategy that we're hoping to develop by the end of this year. Obviously, given the resources and the staffing constraints, we won't be able to implement the water quality grab samples or the actual collection program until next year, pending staffing.
Is there a follow-up, Director Acton?
No, thank you, Madam Chair. That was really good, thorough explanation. Thank you, Ms. Miller.
Okay, Director Morrison, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and further to Director Acton's, and I'm trying to get some help from staff on this one. It was a very thorough report, and took a couple of cracks at it to read it. There was a lot of detail, and I'm looking at the recommendations that come from this. Where I'm trying to go, and this is maybe a little further to what Director Acton was saying, is we had the ANOVA report as an example as to how we can begin to get efficiencies and create systems that are going to be effective and properly run. And this is sort of the equivalent for me as far as a touchstone for land use decisions. And we're all interested in ensuring that not only, are we putting development in areas where there's a proper receiving environment, but that there's good quality water resources as well to service those things. So I'm just having difficulty figuring out how we as elected officials can use the documents that have been produced in an easily accessible format, so that when we're making those decisions and questions that Director Acton has raised, that we can apply this information easily and readily when we're making those decisions and considerations around appropriate development areas. So is there another step in this that can make this a more functional, usable reference guide for elected officials when we sit in consideration of of development requests?
Mr. Hatami, would you like to respond?
Good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair. Just I wanted to add something to that all of the background studies, such as this monitoring result and surface water quality, there are all no background in support of development of a watershed characterization. So basically, that actually, all of these studies actually form a guideline for us, an understanding of the health of that watershed and the capacity of that to support any land use decision. So answering your question, yes, definitely, and ultimately, it will be part of this drinking water and watershed protection, and part of that is watershed management. And it helps us, with all of the long-term planning, short-term planning, and land use decisions or land development decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hatami. I'm moving on now to alternate Director Hain. And I do have you, Director Acton.
Thank you. Just under the financial considerations, I understand why there's no financial considerations at this time, but there is mention that if there are specific items that require additional investments, a future staff report would bring under consideration of the South Cowichan Water Management Plan function, which I believe is function 531. Is it staff's expectation or recommendation that the appropriate body to fund those further investments is function 531?
Ms. Miller?
My recommendation here is that this program fits very nicely into, or this study fits very nicely into what we had proposed as part of the regional drinking water and watershed protection program, which would provide good tactical information across the region. If there's something that comes out of it, something along the lines of an enhanced treatment system for a particular subzone within the area, then that would really be the responsibility of that subzone, not the region, right? So it's around good land use management practices, about informing appropriate infrastructure going forward, but the implementation of that infrastructure would be the responsibility of that community.
Thank you. Moving on to Director Wilson, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to the questions asked by Director Morrison, there is a lot of expertise within that office, as Mr. Hatami has pointed out, but you will recall that I did reference this kind of thing in my presentation or speech, call it whatever you want to, when Ms. Barroso was speaking. Reach out to your residents. There is a huge amount of expertise out there that is readily available. They are there. They can help you. Dr. Yearling, and there are other people, professional engineers, the SBS, everybody is there to help you out. There's another source of independent opinion, and it's all well experienced and qualified.
Thank you. Moving on to Director Acton, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to reference what was mentioned about the funding of the drinking watershed protection function. It sounded like, I know that we as a board had agreed to hire another person to extend that function. And then it was discussed that possibly it was going to be reduced because of COVID, but I understood that was not a final decision that has been made by the board at this time. So could I have some clarity around that? And if that's the case, perhaps it's something we could review, because I don't think at this time it's a wise decision to stop a function as it is a new function.
Ms. Miller?
Perhaps I'll defer this to Mr. Carruthers or Mr. Hatami with regards to the hiring strategy.
I'm not seeing, Dr. Stone.
Okay, can I?
Mr. Hatami, go ahead, please.
Okay, no, just basically, I wanted to clarify that when we developed actually a kind of a strategy for drinking water and watershed protection, and we presented, a kind of high-level work plan for next 10 years. And we also mentioned that in order to actually develop a more detailed kind of function by function, or call it project by project, we needed to hire an FTE to help us with that and be in contact with all of those ENGOs, NGOs, and all of the societies that Director Wilson mentioned, and all of the public that could actually help us to achieve our goals. So again, that was the board decision to actually put a hold on that, not to actually completely stop the function. We are doing, Ms. Miller and myself, we are doing our best to do as a sort of limited deliverables, if you want to call it, and that's actually limited to the strategies for groundwater monitoring, surface water monitoring. But in order to actually launch that or implement that work plan, we cannot do it unless, the board says, go ahead and hire an FTE.
Can I have a follow-up, please?
Director Stone, a follow-up, Director Acton, and then to Director Stone.
There was a position that was approved by the board. That position was what then?
The position approved by the board was a new technical position within the Environmental Services Group to support this particular program. But as Dr. Hitami has just pointed out, the posting of that position has been put on hold pending the new year. In the meantime, as Dr. Hitami has also pointed out, we are doing the best that we can with our existing resources. Obviously, we have to be careful here in that we are being paid by separate functions with separate deliverables. So under this particular function, Dr. Hitami and I are working on the development and completion of the surface water quality strategy, as well as the completion of the objective reports, the development of a hydrometric and climatic monitoring network for installation next year. We're lucky enough that we've had one well installed this year already with the partnership of the province. The development of a groundwater quality strategy, as you've seen here as an example of that, as well as the very important component of data management. One of the things that was brought up by Director Wilson, for example, Director Wilson, was with regards to the water quality and the outfall of the existing treatment plants. We've got all of this data in different forms. The province has data, and so we're working with the province right now to develop a robust data management system so that we are much more effective in sharing information internally, as well as with the province and the community. And so those are the major focuses of work this year, pending the new staffing person coming on board, who will be working quite strongly with the community in terms of community-based science, data collection, and the actual implementation of the programs themselves.
Thank you, Director Stone.
And just a comment that some of the hirings that were presented to the board, it would be probably halfway through since March, did include a delay on the hiring of this position for the drinking water and watershed protection, and that was presented to the board and accepted at that time. But I would contend that this is and I couldn't find the report right away, but I think it was to be delayed late into the year and could be reviewed as we progress. So I think the intention is still to move forward with that hire and that work, but it was just sort of delayed, not necessarily being shut down. So if the board feels there's urgency there, it can be something that we could bring forward again, looking at all the factors involved. Well, I've got the floor, though. I just want to say that I am impressed with this work. I think that the distinction that was made about using this function to develop all the science and background, and I remember a term we were talking about, the watershed atlas, that we could have this sort of quality data as a baseline that we could work from, and that would inform all kinds of decisions, whether it's land use planning or other infrastructure investments that we want to make over the long term. But what excites me the most is that knowledge then allows us in our individual areas, whether it's Ladysmith and our next sewage treatment or reservoir work, or in South Couch and dealing with the very individual issues we have. Once we have this bigger picture of data around watersheds and water availability and quality, it helps us all make smart decisions how we invest locally in infrastructure. So, and limit land use impacts as well. So, and including areas that aren't developed by us necessarily, but including forestry practices and all of the other concerns that we have around resource development and stuff like that, and farming and all of those pieces. So I'm really, this is a great example of what we need to build on, I think, over the next couple of years that will give us that comprehensive look at watersheds throughout the region. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Director Stone. I do have Director Kuhn, Smith, and Nicholson. Have I missed anyone? Okay, Director Kuhn, please.
Yes, as we heard in the previous presentation, and also as I read in the staff report here, groundwater quality within the study area is generally excellent. However, a number of samples exceed the guidelines of Canadian drinking water standards. I wonder, reading all that material, and it's a lot of material to read, I was left with the impression that now we are going to do groundwater monitoring in the whole area. Never mind that most of the systems function fine and most of the water supply is actually quite good. But now it seems to me there's something similar happening here as it was happening with the Yubo hillside. At first, there was a little bit of a concern, oh, well, maybe there'll be some rockfall. And then studies were done, and then the whole world came down, and it was a real disaster. And now we're back to normal. And so I'm wondering, are we just kind of, I don't know, blowing this whole thing up? Yes, there are concerns about water, and I can definitely see that, but it seems to me this is being spread out now. And I have concerns because, okay, there's a talk about a 10-year program, and well, we've been there before. So we get locked in as a board. Oh, we've got to do this, we've got to do this, we've got to do this. And then comes budget time. We all wonder, well, man, how did that happen? We're over again. I just issue that concern because I would like to see us concentrate on the problem areas and try to get those resolved, and not just do a whole blanket inventory and blanket survey of the whole area, even though it is not really necessary. So anyway, that's my concern.
I turn now to, I have Directors Smith, Nicholson, Wilson, and back to Stone, realizing that we also have a recommendation on this as well. So I turn to Director Smith.
Thank you. One of the things that I noticed, I just looked up by function 531 for the South Cowichan Water Study Plan, and that's 0 for this year and for the next 5 years. So I'm not sure how that, I believe another director brought up that function budget 531, and if it's 0, then that has been zeroed out. So that will no longer be the watershed management and the development and that was to occur under there. Supposedly has only moved into the drinking water and watershed protection function. So then I'm sort of confused with regards to which, if that's no longer going to be occurring, then all of it will have to occur under the drinking water and watershed protection. And is that the case then? Maybe Ms. Miller could please address that one.
Ms. Miller?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, the intent is under the new regional drinking water and watershed program that all of the macro level work would be funded in terms of the strategy, the ongoing monitoring, If there are area-specific issues, and I look to Director Wilson's concern with regards to Fisher Road, for example, part of the Fisher Road water quality analysis is being paid for out of the South Cowichan function, which had been moved to zero, but is now funding a portion of it. So depending on the issues going forward, there may be a need for a local function. But for all intents and purposes, up until the new drinking water and watershed protection function, the only watershed function that we had was the South Cowichan, which is now basically being collapsed into the larger regional function.
Director Nicholson.
I'd like to move the recommendation. I think it's really important to take a proactive approach, and this is a good start.
It has been moved and seconded. I still have a speakers list. I have Directors Wilson and Stone. Do they still need to speak to this?
I was just going to move the resolution.
Okay, well, I believe I have Director Wilson. Are you okay to go?
Yes, I am. I cannot believe what was just said by Director Kuhn. It was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. How can you possibly say that you don't agree with testing the water? Come on, unless I misunderstood, I don't know.
Stick to the resolution.
Point of order.
Not get personal. Who was that? Checking in. Okay, I will call the question on the recommendation, but we will read the recommendation first. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Proposed recommendation, or the recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that the recommendations outlined in the staff report to the June 8th, 2020 Regional Services Committee on the Groundwater Quality Survey of Aquifers 197 and 198 be included in the South Cowichan Liquid Waste Management Plan and the Regional Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program for implementation.
I look to the committee and call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Seeing none, motion has passed. Okay, we will now, it is 10:52. I understand that a few directors would like a break. We will have a break till 11 o'clock, so 8 minutes, and we'll see you then.
Video's live.
Welcome back, everyone. We'll now turn to report number 2, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R2 is a report from the Environmental Services Division regarding the Cowichan Watershed Board budget funding for 2020. The proposed recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that the Cowichan Watershed Society, providing services as the Cowichan Watershed Board, be granted $50,000 under the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program to further strategic partnerships and initiatives in support of the Drinking Watershed and Watershed Protection Program objectives.
Thank you. I think that was moved by Director Stone. It was seconded by Director Staples. Is there anyone that would like to speak to that? Seeing none, or Director McGonigal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know what's happened here. I've lost everyone, but if you can hear me, there we go.
Oh, yes, we can hear you. I was just like, where'd you go? Okay, there you are.
Everybody's back, so I think the glitch is finished. I think it's, given the recent discussion on the previous issue, I think it's important to realize the financial constraints on the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Fund. And I would hope that in the very near future that we could have a discussion on removing the Cowichan Watershed Board from this function as a standalone item, so that we don't get into a budgetary debate on the merits of some programs that are most likely coming forward in the near future. I think the provincially recognized work that this group has done for the past decade is important, not only for what they have accomplished, but for what they still need to do. So hopefully we can not get into a budgetary discussion on the merits of different programs throughout the region and look at perhaps this residing as a standalone function. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to call the Director Stone. Would you like to speak to it, or I was going to call the question? I have Director Smith and then Stone. Director Smith.
Thank you. I agree with Director McGonigal in regards to the Cowichan Watershed Society should become a standalone. It is an amazing group. They've done incredible work for a specific area within our region, and our drinking water and watershed function is a regional function funded by taxpayers from the north to the south. And when you allocate 83% of your grant funding to one specific group, it is an indication that that group needs to also look at being standalone. Over the last 10 years, they have received $500,000 from CVRD taxpayers as a whole, from the north to the south. And it's looking like it's time for them to stand on their own. So we may need to make a recommendation either now or in the future to have this function as a designated service function all on its own with its own bylaw. Thank you.
Turning now to Director Stone.
Thank you. Not to further that debate, but I think that it's maybe more appropriate to reflect on how we support groups throughout the region, and that maybe in reflection we can look at how we distribute funds within the function. The entire intention of the drinking water and watershed protection function is built on the shoulders of the 10 years of work of the Cowichan Watershed Board in many ways. And you look at the ancillary benefits that go far beyond just the great work that has been done that is actually resulting now in the actions that are necessary, both in the Kokosila with the first step forward in the Kokosila watershed planning process, and also in the Cowichan with the SHRIF funding that has come forward to do the Weir work. And this is a heritage river that is nationally recognized and of value to every citizen of the region. You notice I use the word citizen and not taxpayer, because citizens in the region, I think, broadly understand the value of this river. But I do agree with the assessment that we also need to take that model and build it out through the reaches from north to south and east to west as well, and look how we manage our watersheds and water resources, and how we engage the community members in each of those to maximize the input and the value that they bring back to us. Those groups were consulted in the development of the 10-year plan, that most of the groups were engaged, and Ms. Miller could correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding, and especially around the day where this all came forward, was going outside and speaking with the leadership of many of the groups throughout the region that seemed to support the direction that we were going and continue to go today. But I would continue to advocate for continual review of the distribution of funds within the function to ensure that we can spread the knowledge that has been gained about how to do things right through the Cowichan Watershed Board throughout the region. But I am supportive of this resolution.
Wilson, and then Alternate Director Hain to close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Legault will, unfortunately, there was an email which came in which wasn't directed at public input time, which did address this. And I'm on side with Director McGonigal and the rest of it who've spoken that we need to see how this the Cowichan Watershed Board is funded in the future. And I have absolutely no objection to funding productive conservation organizations such as the CWB, SBS and the like. but I do have serious reservations regarding the method of funding and the requested change. I kind of hope that this will be a temporary thing until we can get a bylaw in place. And the reason I'm saying that is that the committee will be well aware of the fight that Area C had to get funding for testing of our water. So I sincerely hope that we don't have to go through that fight again, and that the DWP can be used the same as we're doing here to ensure that ongoing testing of those aquifers which may be in danger of being contaminated in whichever way it might be. But yes, I will support this.
Alternate Director Haim.
My points have already been covered by other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will call Director Acton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm surprised that this came up as a non-regional item. This is definitely a regional item that should be in our function. It's we're kind of missing the point here. It's about governance and it's about reconciliation. It's not a group that was formed to make stewardship decisions. It's actually a governance model that incorporates the whole CVRD and First Nations. And I think it's something that we should be really proud of, and we shouldn't even be discussing whether we would be funding it or not regionally.
Thank you so much. Seeing no more hands up, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Seeing none. Motion's carried. One is opposed. Director Smith, opposed? Thank you so much. Okay. We move on now to R3, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Madam Chair. R3 is a report from the Parks and Trails Division regarding Parks and Trails Invasive Plant and Habitat Management Program, and this report is for information.
Are there any questions for staff on this? Director Justice, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yeah, I noted in the report that the CVRD priority plant list is expanded from 48 to 69, but the Capital Region District has 99 priority invasive plants. And the idea is that through the movement of people and materials, there's sort of an inevitable flow of invasive plants from south to north. And so I guess that there's some expectation that there'll be some more arriving from the CRD region. There's only 4 of them in the CVRD with that include recommended herbicide treatments. And I was wondering if staff could explain whether this is because of their particular noxiousness, or whether it's because they're still potentially controllable, unlike, for example, Scotch broom. And I'm also wondering if there's any other ones in the CRD that we are expecting to arrive at some point in time that would be noxious enough to include recommended herbicide treatments.
Hey, Mr. Giddon. Hey, hello. Haven't seen you for a while. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In regards to the movement of species, as far as the mapping of what's gone on, the trend has seen the growth of species northwards towards the north end of the island. So our area obviously has more, and then the Nanaimo has a little bit less, and less further up island. Our list does reflect, slow creep of species coming over the Malahat, basically, with materials. A lot of the time it moves on truck wheels. It can be spread through, people moving compost, all kinds of things. So yes, inevitably we'll probably see more. And with our contractors and other people we work with, we're alerted to new species around. So we kind of add those to the list as we go. Hopefully it doesn't keep expanding at a very quick rate, but we are always keeping a tab on it. In regards to the herbicide use, we follow the provincial guidelines on treating specifically noxious weeds, and they determine which species should use herbicides, and we follow that completely. We don't use herbicides unless it's completely directed through the province on only really noxious weeds that are identified as problematic, for human health issues, so toxicity. Also, ones that are specifically hard to treat and damaging to the environment, and that's the knotweeds that are treated with herbicide. They're not noxious, but they spread so much and so quickly, and they have a challenge to be dealt with. And right now, the province is directing us to where we can treat it with herbicide. Luckily enough, we don't have a lot of species to treat with herbicide right now, and that's great for us because we, the general consensus is we don't all want to use herbicide. But as far as more plants, toxic plants coming over the Malahat, I'm not aware of any that are herbicides being used on them down in CRD. I think most of the other ones are herbaceous plants that can be used. Can be treated mechanically.
Here's a follow-up. The one on the list that I was not aware of was the slender false brome. Can you explain how problematic that is?
Mr. Gedden?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. The slender false brome, like it's stated in the report, is the only occurrence in all of British Columbia. It's not toxic. However, because it's rated as the only occurrence of this species and it's been spreading, they're finding that it's being spread through, I think, elk are consuming it and moving seed through their feces. But it's contained to a small area out by Shaw Creek, and because it's rated as the only occurrence, they consider that as a really important plant to control, and it's controllable. So they treat it with herbicide, and that's again through the province. They've determined that's how they're doing it. They're doing all the treatment there. They want to contain it and eradicate it because they don't want it to spread further in our community or elsewhere in BC. So when they have a priority plant like that only occurring in one place, they'll throw different resources at it appropriately.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I have alternate Director Haim, Director Morrison, and Director Nicholson, and this is for information. Thank you.
Thank you. You used the term mechanically treated. Is that just basically cut down by a machine? And when it comes to that, isn't that just really more maintenance? It won't decrease the incidence of it and that going forward?
Mechanical treatment can be a variety of different methods. There's mowing basically is they call that control, and it doesn't really move towards eradicating the species. It controls the sort of volume in that area by just reducing the seed growth on the plant. So mowing it before seed. Mechanically can also go in there and actually use excavators and remove the species as well. So it goes from mowing all the way to excavation in mechanical treatment. So on a species like broom, right now we're trying to cut it, and that's all that's doing is controlling the continual spread. And ultimately, repeat cutting does reduce the plant over time. So it's a spectrum of mechanical, but it goes from mowing all the way to actually digging out the species.
Director Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is just more of a question for the electoral area directors. I have some specific questions around some of the community parks and the program there. And instead of having that discussion, which could be fairly lengthy, I could either speak directly to staff, or would the electoral area directors be interested in having this information item come up at a future EASC meeting?
I'd like to second that motion. That's a good idea.
Well, we'll just,
if that's a motion to review at electoral area services.
I'm not sure if it was a motion or.
Well, I'd seek direction from staff if we could just have it added to a future EASC agenda.
So which staff member would like to respond?
I'd defer this to a different staff member. I'm not too sure.
Okay. Ms. Cherolf?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I would defer, sorry, Madam Chair, I would actually defer to the corporate officer. If the matter is dealing specifically with electoral areas, then certainly refer to Electoral Area Services Committee.
Okay, so we will refer that to the Electoral Area Services Committee, and you are the chair, Director Morrison. You can follow up on that. I still have some speakers on the list. I have Directors Nicholson and Smith. Have I missed anyone for questions for Mr. Giddens? Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I don't have a question, but I would like to say that, first of all, this is a really important and growing concern in the valley. And it's not just population pressure that's pulling the species up, the invasive species up from the south. It's climate change, which is stressing our ecosystems and actually creating new environmental conditions that opens things up for invasive species. And knotweed in particular, I think, is one that we need to pay much more attention to, because while many people say that the only way to deal with it is with herbicide, the problem with knotweed is it is growing on the sandbars and the gravel bars of our rivers. So I don't really think the community is going to be very okay with spraying herbicide down the course of the rivers. And you would be amazed at how widespread it is now. And I would like to take my hat off to some community members who have been doing a bit of a study on in the Bright Angel Park, doing repeated cuttings and looking at how they can manually control knotweed in small patches. And I think that they're having some success. I was down there the other day, and I really think that we need to pay much more attention and support much more work in this area, because I think inevitably it's going to require manpower on a lot of these species as they grow. And it is truly, for our parks, it's an asset management issue, and for our watersheds, it's a watershed protection issue.
Thank you. I turn now to Director Smith to close.
Thank you. Through the chair to staff, I participated in the volunteer program for the Parks and Trails for working, and we did an invasive removal in one of the works that we did, and we removed a whole metal container of invasive species from just a very tiny little section along the Stocking Creek Park and the Cowichan Valley Trail. I see that there's other workshops, or not really workshops, but volunteer work programs that did the same thing in other areas. Is that a good program, and how is that working when we're looking at these invasive species and removing them? So are you finding that the program has a benefit for people volunteering to work on these for the communities and for our parks?
Thank you. Through the chair, yeah, we're finding great success, especially in programs that have been active for multiple years, because most of our invasive species need repeat treatment, and the more volunteers we get, the greater the impact on the parks. So we've seen parks specifically like Old Mill Park in Shawnigan that's had multiple volunteer events, has seen great control of species, and actually eradication of some species in Old Mill Park. And it also helps education component for the community to understand the importance of this and the importance of the work that needs to be done, because it is a big problem across our region, and I think not enough attention has been brought to it. So I think twofold, it's great because it does educate the community, gets people out, it makes them understand what's going on in our parks, but it also does really impact that work, and it subsidizes the program, because right now the funding in the program is limited and there's lots of work to be done. Like you all see the extent of broom and blackberry specifically through our region, and the impacts that has on park value, but also land value. So I think the volunteer program, I know it seems at times where you're there and you're like, wow, we filled a large bin full of ivy, but look at the, it's a tiny little portion of the park, but over time it does make a massive impact.
Follow up, Director Smith.
Yes, so recently I read an article that the regional district of Nanaimo is working with groups and having just those groups maintain a specific park or specific trail. And is that a way of also looking at controlling the invasive species within our parks? If we started working with these types of groups to take on an actual specific park, is that something we should be looking at?
Mr. Giddens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, we already actually have 2 groups that have formed, and we support that. We don't have the resources to actively recruit and form the groups for themselves, but if they've come to us, we've supported them and we help them do removal. So, like Director Nicholson stated, the knotweed group formed for Bright Angel Park, and we've supported them through that effort, and we help them remove the bagged knotweed. We also have a group at Stony Hill that does work on their own, and it's sort of like a broom busters club, but they're also treating tansy ragwort out at Stony Hill. And then we also have a group out at Yellow Point Park that does broom removal and other invasive removal at Yellow Point Park. So once the groups form and they contact us, we work with them, and then we actually support them through removal of the materials. So if groups in the communities come forward and they want to form a friends of a park and focus on invasive removal, we will and we have been supporting those groups.
Follow up, Director Smith.
Does the CVRD provide insurance for those? Does a CVRD staff member have to be on site for that, or is it under a friend's kind of insurance?
So those 3 groups run separately, and they're sort of a loose affiliation with the Broom Busters. So the 2 that are at Stony Hill and Yellow Point Park are loosely. I don't know their affiliation, but it's through Broom Busters. And the other group at Bright Angel Park is a group of local scientists that are doing a sort of a test of repeat removal of knotweed. So I'm not too certain of their insurance situation, but I can't answer that.
Mr. Farquhar.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so specific to groups wanting to do activities in our parks, when they're under the direction of staff, CVRD, through our insurance provider, Municipal Insurance Association of BC, provides some extension of insurance to those folks that are actively involved under the direction of staff. As Mr. Graham noted, however, we have had opportunities where through societies that are otherwise established, they can bring forward through their society some insurance coverage. The CVRD's insurance does not extend to those societies that are working not under the direct direction of CVRD staff. But we do have the ability to provide provisions with them to give them, in essence, it's almost like a park permit, the ability to go out and do some of these wonderful activities in terms of maintaining and dealing with invasives. And so, as Mr. Graham noted, if there are other groups, societies out there that have an interest, almost like an adopt or friends of, we would welcome meeting with those groups and help them to set up to do things in our parks, because there's lots of invasives out there, and we're endeavoring to do what we can within the program, but every extra set of hands certainly helps. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Giddens and Mr. Farquhar. We're moving on now to R4. Ms. Legault.
Madam Chair, just a point of clarification whether this item that was moved and seconded, that it be sent to the Electoral Area Services Committee for further discussion related to community parks, and I just want to confirm a vote on that.
Okay, we did not vote on it. I thought it was staff direction, so I wasn't clear that that was an actual motion. I know, Director Morrison, could you clarify that, please?
Move that it be referred to electoral area services.
Director Act, seconded by Director Stone. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Great, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Legault, for catching that. Moving on now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item R4 is a report from the Recycling and Waste Management Division regarding Bings Creek yard truck replacement. The proposed recommendation is that it be recommended to the board on June 24th, 2020, that the 2020 budget for Function 520, Solid Waste Complex, be amended to one, increase transfer from operating reserve by up to $1,000 and increase expense by up to $60,000.
Thank you. It was moved by Director Morrison and seconded by Director Stone. Is anyone else like to speak to it? Director Morrison?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank staff. It was very clear, the information provided to us, and I think we could easily move forward on this item.
Have another speaker on the list, Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I actually have some questions that I wanted to ask staff. And
yes, we have staff available.
It relates to our asset management. So we've gone down this road of asset management. So I guess my question is, were we expecting this? Is this being planned for? And are there funds for machinery like this in the operating reserve?
Mr. Walsh, welcome. Go ahead.
Good morning, and through to you, Madam Chair. So I guess CVRD does not have the fleet management plan as yet, but we are working on it. Having said that, this truck has been, it's an old truck, and the tractor. So normally the tractor, they can run through maybe 1 million kilometer diesel ones, but I think because they're not made to sit on the yard. So to do 5 kilometers to 20 kilometers an hour per day. So I think when we took it to the mechanic and they looked at it, they reassessed it, and they said, just fixing it, will cost you way more than what you can get the newer one. And maybe this is a time to probably change it from the old tractor to the terminal tractor. Maybe that'll be the right view. So having said that, we are still working on the fleet management from the division's perspective, and hopefully we can present that at the division level at that time.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up, Director Nicholson? Microphone, please.
Yes, I do have a follow-up. I have two questions. One is, what in our asset management plans, what is the requirement on maintenance for equipment like this? And my other question is, when we do our asset management planning, are we looking at whether we've got the right equipment? Like, obviously we've been using the wrong piece of machinery for a number of years. So that to me seems a bit of a problem that we maybe should be looking at through our asset management plan when we develop it.
I do have Mr. Hatami that would like to speak to Mr. Hatami would like to speak to this as well. I could go back to Mr. Warwick.
Sure, thank you very much. Regarding the asset management plan, when we started, a number of asset types were not actually included in that plan, and fleet actually was one of them. And the same thing with computers, IT, and also in future, we are going to look at the natural capital assets. So at that time, we didn't do that. However, a very first draft of a kind of fleet management plan was put together, but if CVRD is ready to go ahead, we can actually include it in future as part of our strategic plan. We want to consider that. That's for the asset management side of it. But in terms of the type of equipment that is suitable for our operation, I leave it to Tosif to actually go.
Mr. Warwick.
Thank you. So I think the history of this yard truck is because this service was actually contracted out at some point in time, and we were having difficulty with the availability of a tractor and what we do with this. So I think when we brought it in-house in 2008, this was the same machinery that was used by the contractor. That's what we started to use. We just replaced it from that end. So we had it for that while. We know that when we were going to replace it, we replace it with the right one. Recommendation is about.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Nicholson, turn off your microphone, please. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion is carried. Thank you so much. Ms. Legault?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're on to question period, and I have received several questions. The first item is from Susan Kaufman. Madam Chair, please allow me to say thank you to Kate Miller for inviting Sylvia Barrasso for a very enlightening presentation on the South Cowichan aquifers, 197, 198. It is clear from Ms. Barrasso's presentation that land use has a direct impact on the health of the aquifers, groundwater, and wells, whether public or private, and requires a collaborative response from several levels of government and agencies. Madam Chair, based on the information provided today, will the CBRD undertake a review of land use, wastewater, and drinking water sources that will promote best practices, policies, and regulations within your area of responsibility to better protect the aquifers?
Thank you very much, Susan. I believe we had heard that the harmonization, that we would be working this in with our new way of doing our planning and harmonization with our OCPs. So it looks like it's heading in that direction.
There's a second part to this. We heard several times today that land clearing has a clear effect on the aquifers. Based on this information, could and should the CBRD petition the provincial government to give the regional districts the ability to incorporate a tree and land clearing bylaws that prohibit such activities without first applying for a development permit?
This would be something that we'd have to work on. We're already in partnership with the ministries at this time, and I believe that is the land clearing is a local government. The tree bylaws is something that we have been looking at, but we are not able to do it at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item is from Cliff Evans. Madam Chair, can the CBRD set up an emergency response team to analyze and solve existing water problems in coordination with VHA and Ministry of Forests? Aren't there known existing water problems that should be fixed now before they get worse? Are we not putting some citizens' health at risk from the lack of action now?
What I've seen with the presentations today is that we are working together collaboratively and need to do more, and with more resources. I think Ms. Barrasso had also said that the ministry needs more resources, and hopefully we'll be working on that.
The next submission is from Diane Allen. It was intended for public input period, but was unfortunately not clear that it was intended, and there is a question attached to it. So it's regarding item R2, the request for ongoing funds for the Watershed Board. For at least the last years, 2016 to 2018, the Watershed Board has received funds from Function 131 Environmental Services, amounts of $50,000 per year. Function 532 Drinking Water, in 2019, there was a $50,000 grant made for the same amount as previously shown under the Environmental Initiatives function. Was this contribution paid to the Watershed Board? And if the Watershed Board continues to receive $50,000 of taxpayer money, why doesn't it have its own budget function?
Well, I believe that's why we went, they are under this function now, and the Watershed Board is able to receive it. Now it's legitimate under the new watershed function. Before that, it was under the Environmental Services and didn't have its own place.
Madam Chair, the final submission. Question from Susan Kaufman. Madam Chair, in regards to invasive species management, invasive species is a regional concern and affects on all of our parks and land areas. Appreciating Director Morrison's motion to refer the topic back to EASC. Should the board also endorse a regional approach and a cooperative management program with the member municipalities?
Sounds like a good idea, since the borders of invasive species don't end at different areas. So it sounds like something she could ask staff about.
And the final question is to community volunteers working within CVRD parks. Can you provide confirmation or comment that this work will be subject to the COVID-19 guidelines?
Absolutely, we follow all the provincial guidelines.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes question period.
Is there a motion to adjourn? Been moved and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you so much. We will be going now